Hi there, you lovely people. It's great to have you here in the Holy Shed once again, our very own little parish at the bottom of the garden. And look, if you haven't seen her before, um, this is our area bishop. Yeah, resplendent in her wonderful cope. She's been sitting out here on that branch and bobbing around the garden all day, keeping an eye on us all, making sure that I'm in order. So, yeah, I feel very supervised and cared for. And someone asked if I could sometime turn the camera around and show you what I'm looking at in the holy shed. So here you go. That's what I see every day when I sit here. And the image on my laptop there is one I used in Soul Space this week on the theme Dark Nights and Bright Mornings. Now, if you've never visited Soul Space, let me tell you just a little bit about it. Soul Space is a kind of alternative service which, up until lockdown last year, I was holding in a couple of pubs in London, one in North London, one in South London, using their big screens. But since then, I've been running two Zoomed Soul Space events, one for St Ethelburga's Centre for Reconciliation and Peace, where I'm a chaplain, and the other for the Oasis Church Social Group in Croydon. I sometimes describe Soul Space as meditation for a YouTube generation. It's a mixture, really, of music videos, film clips, poems, images, and quite a bit of yakety yak from me, all neatly wrapped around some relevant theme. It's an essentially live event, but St Ethelburgers have recorded the last couple, and I've put up a link for them on the Holy Shed page, I think maybe on my own Facebook page as well. So why not check them out? Because I know not everyone can be there for the live events, but I think you'll really enjoy them. But let me know what you think. And there's one other thing which I'd like to tell you about, a bit of parish news, which you might have noticed on my Facebook page, which is the Black Sheep and Prodigals is now available in Spanish. Oh, yes. And this is what it looks like. And it's now available in hard copy and digital form. And I'm very grateful to our lovely friend Angela, who nudged me quite hard, so hard that I couldn't ignore the project of producing this. And I'm also thankful to Ruben and Darren, who've published it, and to Meta, who translated it. So if you've got Spanish speaking friends anywhere around the world, well, you know what to do. One of the things I mentioned on Soul Space this week was a brilliant book by Joe Harkness, which is called Bird Therapy. And in 2013, Joe suffered a breakdown and almost took his own life. But one of the things that the doctor recommended to him was mindfulness. And it turned out that the best way that Joe could pursue mindfulness was through birds, which he obviously had a keen interest in. It's a lovely book. It's a beautifully written book, especially if you're into birds, but it's just great for anyone, really, who's looking for a way to discover greater calm in life. It says on the back cover, this groundbreaking book is filled with practical advice. Joe explains the transformative impact that bird watching had on his life and invites the reader to discover these extraordinary effects for themselves. It's really, really good. And one of the things that he talks about is 5 recommendations by Mind, the mental health charity, for greater well-being. And here they are. They're worth just flagging up. It's important for us to be connected to other people and to make the effort to connect, even if we have to do that virtually these days. To be active, to not just, fall asleep on the settee all the time, but be active, get out there, use our bodies, exercise, take notice of what we are seeing, what's all around us, to learn new things, educate ourselves. And I love the last one, to give. I think that's a great lesson in life, really, that one of the best ways that we can find a sense of well-being in ourselves is through connecting with others and through giving to others. So we're going to light a candle now. And I'd like you to light this candle for yourself and for other people that you know at this time who are finding this is a pretty dark night we're going through and looking for another bright morning to dawn. So let some love go out of your heart towards other people as you light a candle, a beautiful, simple symbol of hope, and take a few deep breaths as you look at this little flame. And we say together, God grant me the serenity to live fully and generously through circumstances I cannot control. Hope to keep on imagining better things for myself and the world. And courage to change what I can instead of simply leaving it to others. Amen. So, It's a Sin, Channel 4. Have you been watching it? There's been plenty of adverts, trailers for it going on, and I've watched, or at least I've started watching it, and it's great. I really like it. Made by Russell Davies, the creator of the award-winning Queer as Folk series, and it basically follows the stories of three gay men in the early 1980s who, to begin with, we see them leaving various levels of conservative families and communities to try to establish their own sexual identity. But they're doing this just at the time when the HIV/AIDS epidemic breaks out. And I thought that I remembered that era pretty well. But watching this not only brought back a whole host of memories of things that I've forgotten, it made me actually feel in myself afresh the darkness and the fear of that time. And of course, there are resonances with our own situation today with the pandemic. It's a Sin. I think it's a masterpiece of television, really. Russell Davies is brilliant at weaving together humour, irreverence and gaiety with pathos, fear and devastation, really. It made me laugh quite a lot. It made me cry, not just because of the brilliant storytelling, but because of people in our life who we lost to HIV/AIDS back in the 80s and 90s, people who made us laugh and then caused us to cry. Of course, you can't tell the story of HIV without recounting a story of prejudice and horrible bigotry, and this TV show does that very powerfully. Honestly, it's a great watch. It's worth taking the time to look at. Now, by the time the AIDS epidemic took off, I was already well on a journey of radically rethinking my attitudes and theology about homosexuality. I hadn't settled the issue in my head, but my heart was certainly becoming clear. Now, some people will say, aha, that just proves it, doesn't it? That you started from the wrong place, allowing your heart to rule your head, your emotions and personal assumptions to dictate your theology. Well, there is a theological/philosophical argument there, which I won't delve into right now for fear of putting some people to sleep. But the nub of it is this, that I believe there can be no meaningful theological reflection without presuppositions of some sort. The issue isn't whether we start out with certain assumptions, but whether we will be prepared to adjust them if the evidence requires us to. Contrary to what fundamentalists claim, fundamentalism is not actually entirely founded on the Bible. These are the people who claim to be the big biblicists, but actually fundamentalism is significantly based on presuppositions which are brought to the Bible, just as liberalism is also based on presuppositions. It's impossible not to have them, not to have assumptions in life. The question is, will we be honest and upfront about them so that they can be taken into account? Okay? Well, there ends the hermeneutics class. We'll pursue it again another time. But look, here's the real point. The decisive issue for me with regard to stuff like homosexuality is the nature of God. That to me is just everything. I mean, theology is that, isn't it? Theo means God. It's Godology. Theology is how we conceive of, how we imagine, how we picture, how we portray God. By the time AIDS came along, I hadn't got all my theological ducks in a row about same-sex relations, but I did believe passionately in a God who smiles on true love wherever it's found, in heterosexual or homosexual relationships or wherever. Because my presupposition is a God of boundless love. That's the landscape that I inhabit and from which I look at and judge everything else. And to be honest, I just can't be doing with any sort of notion of God, a God who condemns beautiful human beings who happen to fall in love with people of their own gender. And I have to say that some of the most challenging, stimulating expressions of true love that I have ever encountered are within same-sex relationships. But, and this is important, having said all of that, the reality is that when faced with the AIDS epidemic, I found that fear is sometimes more deeply rooted than I care to recognize. And let me tell you, back in the day, HIV/AIDS did evoke a hell of a lot of fear. Trust me, coronavirus doesn't have a corner on the market of paranoia. I remember when our older daughter, Jenny, brought a gay work colleague round for dinner with his partner, both of them HIV positive. Keith, who was, he was a fabulous, flamboyant queen. He confessed halfway through the meal that he'd wondered if we were going to begin the evening by all holding hands and singing Kumbaya. I said, no, we're going to leave that till the end of the meal. But that's really how the evening went. Lots and lots of laughs, plenty of wine, and so much warmth and love. I really liked Keith and Andrew. However, when Jenny told us that she was going to move in with them, that she was going to share their flat, to my surprise, I panicked. I mean, I was well informed. I'd made sure I was. I knew exactly how people did and didn't contract the virus. I also knew that Jenny was a wised up young woman, but still, my reaction was panic. At the time, I ridiculed people who thought Princess Diana might catch AIDS from touching sick patients that she visited in hospital. But then I had to confront my own fear, as well as the shame that I also felt for even feeling that way. But I got through, and we spent happy times with Jenny in the flat with the boys. And eventually, I had the privilege of conducting Keith's funeral and comforting Andrew, who told me, I don't really believe in God, Dave, but I do like the God of your family. I love that. Fear, of course, is a natural response. It's a survival instinct, but it's not always rational. So fear needs to be examined. Fear needs to be confronted to sort out whether it has a basis or not. And once we know that it hasn't, well, then we have a choice to let it continue ruling us irrationally or to ditch it. If we follow irrational fear, if we allow it to rule our hearts, it will breed lies and prejudice. And if we allow it to rule our theology, it will pervert the very nature of God and the whole of our religion. In 1997, the then Bishop of Stepney, John Sentamu, asked if I would take over the Anglican chaplaincy at Mildmay Hospital in Hackney until a new permanent chaplain was appointed. Well, it took 2 years as it turned out. Mildmay is a wonderful hospital specialising in treating people with HIV/AIDS. It was back then at the forefront of the HIV field in Europe. Well, frankly, of all the things I wanted to do back then, hospital chaplaincy was pretty near the bottom of the pile. I mean, I'm squeamish about medical stuff, always have been, and back then I was even more squeamish about dealing with people who were dying, and just about everybody with HIV/AIDS was dying in the 1990s. But I loved the hospital. I loved what it was all about. I loved what it was doing, so I agreed. And I can't tell you how important that was, how formative that time was for me. My first week there was a baptism of fire. I was asked if I would meet Brian before he went home for the weekend. Brian was a beautiful, elegant, and very intelligent gay man in his early 50s. He'd been effectively married to his partner for 19 years. Couldn't get married back then, but that was the relationship they had. He'd long ago shelved religion, but he had grown up in a quite staunch Roman Catholic background. And you know what they say about give me a child until he's 7. Brian knew that he was dying when I saw him, but his dilemma was that a whole pile of horrible religious crap, fear, was flooding his brain. I'm a queer, he said to me, and God hates queers. Well, I spent 30 or 40 minutes doing everything I could to convince him differently, to convince him that his notion of God was wrong, that God loved him, queer or not, exactly as he was, and that his love for his partner was absolutely equal in God's eyes to my love for Pat and hers for me. It was a struggle because religious fear embeds itself very deeply in the psyche. I felt I'd hardly got started on the task when the taxi arrived to take him home for the weekend, so we agreed to reconvene on Monday. However, when I arrived on Monday at the hospital, I was told that Brian, over the weekend, had taken his own life. I wanted to believe that my input made a difference, that even in his despair he had flung himself into the arms of a loving God, but all I felt was deep, deep sadness that I hadn't had more time with him. And at the funeral, which I also took, his mother, who knew all about his mental anguish, movingly screamed out, berating the faith, the religion that she had introduced Brian to as a child. "Why have you done this to my beautiful son?" she cried. "He was full of love. Why did you drive him to do this?" It was, spine-tingling stuff. And it wasn't clear who she was shouting at. Was it God? Was it the church? Was it the Pope? But it was terribly disturbing. And that was the start of my week as a chaplain. I did, however, have an awful lot of fun times, if I can put it that way. Believe it or not, quite often, while I helped patients to plan their funerals. I mean, I know that sounds a bit weird. It does sound ridiculous, but there were hilarious experiences, like the one that I describe at the start of my book, The Bad Christian's Manifesto, where I was sitting with Jim and his partner planning his funeral. And he announced that he wanted to have my way at the start of his funeral, but not the popular Frank Sinatra version, no, the Sex Pistols version. And I can tell you, that was a funeral to remember. Whole nother story you can read about in the book. As a teenager, Jim had received counselling, and I put that in inverted commas. I'm afraid a lot of Christian counselling is counselling. And he had received quite a lot of it in his charismatic church, where the vicar tried to exorcise him of a spirit of homosexuality. Well, it didn't work. Of course it didn't, thank God. He still fancied boys, probably more as a result. But again, in his worst moments, Jim had throwbacks to the awful stuff that his vicar fed him. He couldn't get it out of his head that AIDS was a plague sent from God to punish people like him. Well, I had more time with him than I did with Brian, and I think I finally convinced him that a God who would punish people with a plague like that would basically not be God. He would be the devil himself, a monster, definitely not the God of Jesus Christ. Fear and prejudice are really horrible, horrible things which manifest in all kinds of ways. In homophobia, yes, but also in racism, in sexism, in bigotry and discrimination toward disabled people, in religious hatred, in ageism, and God knows what else. Haven't we all been disgusted at the hatred toward black football players in recent weeks? I mean, as you know, I'm not exactly a big Man United fan, but I am a big fan of Marcus Rashford and his passionate interventions on behalf of school children for their school meals. If there's one person that the Prime Minister does not want to upset, it's Marcus Rashford, a real people's champion. So why in heaven's name does he get this avalanche of hatred and social media. Why does anybody get this? I feel really glad that the two Liverpool clubs and the two Manchester clubs issued a joint statement this week, part of the Greater Manchester Hate Crime Awareness Week, condemning not just racism but every form of prejudice and hatred. It's a Sin, of course, is a line from the Pet Shop Boys song, which is a camp, tongue-in-cheek jibe at Neil Tennant's Catholic past and the whole religious guilt trip thing. But it did get quite a lot of serious responses from people who identified with what he was saying. So Neil Tennant did have to acknowledge that probably it had more depth of meaning than he intended. And of course, he's right. Religion, whether Catholic, Protestant, evangelical, or whatever, has all too often loaded people with shame and false guilt about sexual stuff. As many of you know, our daughter Lizzie is married to a woman, and I took a blessing of their relationship too. Here we are. Lizzie's the one nearest the camera, and I'm the one in the pretty dress. And people have told me that, you know, her being gay has influenced my theology. Well, maybe it has, but let me tell you, I was a lost cause long before Lizzie came out. And when she told us, she said, I know you guys are cool about this stuff, but I'm not sure how you feel about being one of yours. Well, all I can say is we were delighted, not least because it kind of explained quite a lot. But it was also amazing to see her take a stand for who she was, and to see her subsequently flourish as she as she went forward from there. Basically, Christianity has a pretty appalling record of generating guilt about human embodiment. It's never really entirely shaken off the early influences of Gnosticism, which treated the physical body with its passions and desires as an evil to be repressed and overcome, instead of being embraced and celebrated as a divine gift. I don't much like or use these days the word sin. It's far too laden with all kinds of baggage that I've spent decades trying to help people to get shot of. But does that mean that I don't believe in sin? Of course not. Human beings are part of a vast process of evolution. We are constantly evolving physically, of course, but also we have the option to evolve morally and spiritually too. Sin in that whole process is, I think, not at all about offending a righteous God. I think it's about making choices which block off, which stop our evolution morally and spiritually as human beings. Every day we make choices to become more fully who God intends us to be, or choices to revert to behavior which is basically subhuman. And it's not hard to tell the difference, by the way. I mean, we see it every day in real life around us. We see it on the television, on the news, or whatever. But, this has got nothing to do with stuff like sexual orientation. I think the real sins, which do indeed sadden the heart of God, are the dehumanizing choices that we sometimes make. Like when we mindlessly abuse people, when we abuse other creatures, our fellow creatures on earth, when we treat others as objects for our own selfish will and desire, when we live as if only we ourselves mattered, or when we diminish the value or potential of others through prejudice and injustice, when we treat Mother Earth simply as an object of our consumerist passion. Sin is a huge subject in religion. It is in Christianity, that's for sure. So, we're definitely going to have to come back to it on other occasions in the shed. But in essence, I should say that I just cannot see sin as an issue about breaking rules, though I understand that rules serve a purpose. No, I think sin is actually about love, or more specifically, sin means failing to love, choosing not to love. It's a choice before us all the time, every single day, to be love or not to be love. See, and that really is the question, by the way, to love or not to love. So let's pause a moment and we'll say a prayer. This is a prayer which I wrote for Soul Space this week, but it seems relevant here too. You can join in if you want, or just listen. Thank you, loving God, for the wonder of the threads of hope which you weave through all creation. Thank you right now for small signs of spring awakening, for magnificent, fragile flowers appearing in gardens and parks, for increasing daylight and bright mornings. Thank you also for signs of love and hope in the midst of the pandemic, for the smile of a stranger, the wonder of random kindness, for the tireless work of those caring for the sick or comforting the dying and the bereaved. Help us also to play our part, to be bearers of light and hope in the world, courageous in imagination, defiant in the face of despair. May we be harbingers of better times to come, flames of goodness lighting the way home, cushions of comfort amid pain, frustration and confusion. May love and friendship be our guide always. Amen. So, time for our ritual moment. And what better ritual can there be? Let's pour a drink and make a toast. So whatever you've got to hand, fill a glass or a cup or whatever. And let's hold it for a moment in gratitude that despite all that's going on round about us, we have life, we have the possibility of choosing to do good things, to do loving things, to do wise things, instead of stupid, inhuman things. Let's toast the glorious gift of life in all its beauty and diversity. Let's toast the coming of spring, the promise of warm sunshine and green surroundings. Let's toast the future with hope, a future of love and justice and health for ourselves and this wonderful planet, which is our home. So, friends, raise your glasses and say after me, to life, l'chaim. Martin Luther said that gratitude was the very essence of religion. Meister Eckhart said, if the only prayer you ever say in your life is thank you, that will be enough. And that's what our toast is really all about. So, hey guys, if you like what you're seeing here, if you enjoy this, you can always support me and Pat and the Holy Shed, buying us a coffee on the coffee site, which there's a link to at the top of the Holy Shed page. Thank you so much, you lovely people, for the support that you are giving to us at this time. So we're going to finish now, and what we'll do is we'll finish with a blessing. You can join with me in saying, the blessing of God, the eternal goodwill of God, the shalom and salam of God, the wildness and warmth of God, be among us and between us now and always. Amen. So, actually, I lie. We're not quite finished. There's one last thing that I want to leave you with, and it's a song by the San Francisco Gay Men's Chorus. San Francisco, of course, is one of those places where the whole HIV/AIDS thing first showed its ugly face. So it's appropriate to finish with the Gay Men's Chorus from San Francisco singing a lovely song called Truly Brave. And they sang this earlier on last year for health workers in the States and everywhere. So thanks for being with me again today. Go well, guys, and remember to be kind to yourselves, be kind to other people, stay human. Amen. Enjoy this.
You with the sad eyes discouraged. Oh, I realize it's hard to take courage in a world full of people. You can lose sight of it all, and the darkness inside you makes you feel so small.
You can be amazing, you can turn a phrase into a weapon or a drug. You could be the outcast or be the backlash of somebody's lack of love. But I wonder what could happen. I see your true colors shining through. I see